All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Did a Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. Sorry. So, today, we are actually... Thank you, phone. We are actually starting a new class that was suggested by someone on the D&D Cross Final Fantasy XIV forum. And fun fact, other than the first class I picked in this series, every class that I have covered since then has been requested of me from one of the people watching. So if you would like to help decide what my next class that I cover is, put it in the description down below. If you don't know what classes there are for me to go over, you should probably go to the description and click on the link next to Get It Here, because that will take you to the 5th edition D&D Cross Final Fantasy XIV Classes and Races Compendium Reddit. It's a great place. They've been really wonderful there. I've had quite a few really interesting discussions about some of the stuff I think of, and yeah, it's a really great place. You can actually talk to the person who's actually created all this stuff, get their idea on how the stuff works. It is just fantastic. So we are actually going to be moving to the next class in that compendium, the Red Mage. Now, hold on just one second. As a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon and turn notifications on. All of those things help tell YouTube that this is good quality content, and YouTube will recommend it to other people, which will bring more people into the fold, which will help me be able to make more things. So please do that. And like I said before, in the comments below, feel free to suggest the next class that I cover. So the Red Mage. The Red Mage is actually the oldest class in Final Fantasy that we've covered thus far. The Red Mage showed up in the original Final Fantasy. In the original Final Fantasy, you had a total of 6 classes. You had Fighter, Monk, Fighter or Warrior, depending on the translation. So Fighter, Warrior, Monk, Thief, Black Mage, White Mage, and Red Mage. And each one had their own thing that they were kind of good at to a point. The Red Mage, their special thing was they could cast both white and black magic. And in Final Fantasy, white magic is effectively healing spells and kind of, if you were to translate it into D&D terms, white magic would kind of be divine-based magic, because it tends to focus a little bit more on healing and buffing into the things like that. And as the series went on, you also got things like the arrow spell or the holy spell, very specific spells that had very specific uses. In the first game, you had the Dia spell, which was just a spell that did damage to undead creatures. So even from the beginning, white magic has been this kind of anti-undead and healing based spell. And then black magic is a little bit closer to what D&D might consider arcane based magic, where your core black magic spells were fire, thunder, or bolt, and ice or blizzard. And in the original translation, bolt or thunder was called lit. And then they would get other things too, but black magic was basically offensive spells. white magic was basically defensive spells. And so the red mage got to be able to cast both of them, but the red mage would get less spell slots than either white or black mage. So they had a little bit more of a versatility, but they had less actual castings that they could do. And in addition to that, the most powerful white and black magic spells, which were, I believe, the 9th level, is either 8th or 9th levels spells in the original Final Fantasy. The red mage couldn't learn, and there would be certain spells almost every level that the red mage couldn't learn, like the heal spell, which was a group heal, as opposed to the cure spell, which would just heal a single person. The red mage couldn't learn the heal spell, and there was other black magic spells too that I can't remember off the top of my head. But that was kind of what it was you would trade in a little bit of utility in less spell selection and less castings of those spells to have the ability to choose from both black and white magic. As it went on, red mages kind of showed up in different ways throughout the series, but Final Fantasy V reintroduced the red mage, and the unique thing about it there was it eventually learned an ability called, I think it was called X-Spell or something like that, but it eventually was translated in the first US release. It was eventually translated to something to the effect of Dual Cast, which is the traditional red magic ability that's now kind of tied to it, and that's what shows up in Final Fantasy XIV, which is basically this way for red mages to actually cast 2 spells, either one after another or much faster than other casters. In Final Fantasy XIV, red mage was actually my first, and currently right now my only kind of caster DPS class that I'm maxed. But yeah, basically what happens is you cast one spell, and whatever your next spell is an instant cast. So the red mage is really, really interesting to play in Final Fantasy XIV, and that's the version we're going to be kind of looking at translated to 5th edition to the D&D. So yeah, let's dive into the class itself. First things first, the basic overview of the class, your hit die and all that. It uses a D8 for its hit die, which is pretty average with casters. As far as spell slots are concerned, the red mage is what is considered in 5th edition a full caster, meaning it gets spell slots all the way up to 9th level. Now, there is something that I'm assuming is a misprint, because the 6th level spells, at 20th level, full casters should have 4 first level, 3 each of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2 each of 6th and 7th, and then 1 each of 8th and 9th spell slots. However, the red mage has an additional 6th level spell slot for no reason I can really tell, other than it looks like they accidentally just followed the 5th level progression of spell slots, and just moved it over effectively. So that needs to change, because that does unbalance this. It may seem weird, but giving especially a 6th level spell slot, giving a class an additional spell slot on top of all their other abilities does unbalance it a little bit. So changing that back to the normal spell progression would make sense. That does mean the original idea of the red mage, where they got less spell slots, is not something we see here, which kind of makes sense. In 5th edition, there's really only 2 ways you can create quote-unquote less spell slots. You can be what's called a half-caster, which only gets spell slots up to 5th level and gets their spell slot progression significantly slower. And half-casters in general also have melee abilities, which the red mage does. That's the other thing that the 4th edition, or the Final Fantasy XIV version of the red mage has, is they use a rapier for their weapon, and they have an entire melee combo that they do. But in all actuality, when you're actually playing the class, you are mostly casting spells until you build up a gauge, and then you jump in, do your melee combo, jump back out, and finish off with spells again. So as much as they do technically have the ability to melee, it's generally just something that you do really quick every once in a while, and then you go back to just going back to casting spells. So making them a half caster, I don't think would make a ton of sense. I think this makes sense for what they are. So in addition to that, proficiencies, I get light and medium armor. Again, makes sense. Weapons, they can use simple weapons, and then they can also use short swords and rapiers. So they are not a full martial weapon kind of class, which again makes sense, especially since your traditional red mage is only going to be using a rapier. And in their offhand, in Final Fantasy XIV, what happens is when they draw their rapier, they have this little stone that floats above their other hand, and they get into like a fencing stance. And then when they cast, they flip the rapier around so that the blade is going down this way, and they shove the crystal that's been floating on the end, and they cast it like this. And it's really cool and really epic looking. So that kind of makes sense. Saving throws are dexterity and charisma, which again kind of makes sense. Dexterity because they are a very dexterous class, and again in Final Fantasy XIV you kind of jump forwards and backwards and do all that fun stuff. Charisma makes, it's a saving throw. They are rather dashing, so I guess it makes sense. I can't think of another one that makes more sense. And then starting equipment, you can choose either leather or hide armor, the difference being light or medium armor. And then rapier, a spellcasting focus, and then an explorer's pack or a dungeoneer's pack. So that's the basics of the class. Again, not crazy. Let's go into the actual abilities. Starting at first level, they get their spellcasting right at first level. They learn 4 cantrips, which other than the wizard is kind of the standard number of cantrips that you learn. Wizards learn a few extra cantrips because they're wizards, and that's what they do. But you start with 4 cantrips. They talk about spell slots. Charisma is your spellcasting ability for the red mage, which again kind of makes sense with the idea that they are doing something that's in the lore of Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy in general. Red wizards are kind of roguish in the idea that there are rules to how magic works in Final Fantasy. There's white magic, there's black magic, and then you also, as it goes on, you start getting even more subdivisions. You have time magic and summon magic, and blue magic, and all those things. So with the red mage, they are going to be that kind of rogue, I'm not going to follow your rules style casting, very similar to the sorcerer, which is an innate caster and they use their charisma, or the warlock, which is another charisma based spellcaster, who again kind of breaks the rules by going, yeah, I'm not going to study magic, I'm not going to work at it. No, I'm going to sell my soul to some really powerful being, and they're just going to give it to me. So that, to me, makes sense. It means multi-classing with sorcerers, bards, and warlocks is going to be a little bit easier if you do want to try the multi-classing. Yeah. So other than that, spellcasting is spellcasting. I'm not going to call it a quote-unquote defining feature of the class because tons of other classes have spellcasting as well, and we're about to get into the big defining features. So, defining feature number 1. And just to give you guys a reminder of 5th edition class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. And in order to do that, they have these things that we call defining features. They're either abilities or features that are unique to the class, or they are features that other classes may get, but maybe this class gets them early or is able to use them in a different way than other classes. To give you an example, again, spellcasting is known by a ton of different classes, but it's a defining feature for the wizard because the wizard can gain spells in a way that no other class can with their spellbook feature. They can cast they can learn more spells than literally every other class in the game. So that makes it a defining feature because they can use their spellcasting in a way that no other class can. The defining features for the Red Mage are two. The first one is called Flair Points. At first level, you gain... So typo here, it says you gain, you have a number. So they probably just want to cross out you gain and turn it into you have a number. So you have a number of points for your Red Mage level in the Flair Points column of the Red Mage table. This is worded really poorly. You regain all expended Flair Points when you finish a short or long rest. So the basics of it are, and the way I think it should be phrased, is you have a number of Flair Points for your Red Mage according to the table, the Flair Point table on the Red Mage table. Something similar to that. They have. I would probably just go and look at the monk key description because it has the same wording there, and that will make this wording a lot better. Because the way it's written right now is just really confusing. Basically, you have Flair Points. You start at 1 Flair Point, and you eventually make it up to 10 Flair Points by the time you reach to 20th level. Yeah, it's not one every other level. They kind of heavy load it at first to where second, third, and fourth level you gain 1 Flair Point every level, and then you don't get another Flair Point until 10th, which is interesting, I guess. It's definitely something that isn't done with any other class, where they heavy load you at the top, and then you don't get anything for a bunch of levels, and then they start doing it more average. So yeah, basically Flair Points are your limited resource. Very similar to key points in that you get them with a short, get them back with either a short or a long rest, meaning Red Mages are much more dependent on short rests than other classes. Very similar again to monks and to warlocks who get their spell slots back on short rests. So short rests very useful for the Red Mage. And taking something that allows you to gain extra benefits, like taking feats that allow you to gain extra benefits on a short rest, will be useful for you and also useful to your allies if you can get the things that allow you to maybe cook during a short rest or something and give them benefits. Or if you take a few levels in Bard, to where you can give them Song of Rest, things like that. The second defining feature is called Dual Cast. We've already talked about Dual Cast as it relates to Final Fantasy. This is how it relates to D&D. When you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 action, you can spend 1 Flair Point to change the casting time to 1 bonus action for this casting. You may not do so with a spell greater than 4th level. So, this is somewhat unique and somewhat not. First things first, this is very, very similar to quick casting from the sorcerer. They spend a sorcery point and they can turn a spell that takes 1 action to cast to a bonus action. Now, in the PHB, it states, and they actually have a little aside thing here that mentions bonus action casting, which is a spell cast with a bonus action is especially swift. You must use a bonus action on your turn to cast the spell, provided that you haven't already taken a bonus action on this turn. You can't cast another spell during the same turn, except for a cantrip with a casting time of 1 action. So this is something to help balance the game. And Critical Role actually found out why this was so important during their first campaign. They actually translated their game for their first Kick campaign years ago now. They went from Pathfinder to D&D 5th edition, and one of the players was playing a sorcerer in Pathfinder, which is very, very different than the 5th edition sorcerer. And so they took quick casting, but in Pathfinder they were allowed to cast multiple leveled spells because their system is just very, very different to quick cast them, whereas in 5th edition they couldn't. So they started off letting them just quicken any spell. That's what it's called, quicken spell. Quicken any spell, and they very quickly found out that you can't do that in 5th edition because right at 3rd level there's a massive jump in the power of spells, and having a spellcaster be able to cast 2 leveled spells in a single turn is devastating, especially as easy as it is for sorcerers. So they had to go back to following the actual rules in 5th edition, which states if you quicken a spell, if you cast a bonus action spell in general, because there are other spells that are already bonus actions, you can't cast another leveled spell. And that's what they've kind of mentioned here. The other thing that makes this different from Quicken Spell is you can only dual cast a spell up to 4th level. Generally, when you see limitations like this, because in Critical Role, they did do a change where they allowed, Orion was the player, they allowed Orion to cast up to 2nd level spells on the same turn that he quickened a spell. So he theoretically could cast like a 4th level spell and then a 2nd level spell as his action if he quickened the 4th level, to avoid dealing with just the huge power jump at the 3rd level spells. This one, it's limiting to 4th level, but again, you're not able to cast 2 4th level spells at the same time. It just allows you to quicken up to a 4th level spell effectively. In this, it's a dual cast, which I actually like. Again, Quicken Spell is a uniquely sorcerer thing. It's one of their defining features, is their meta magic abilities. So not just giving it out to another spellcasting class, I believe in. And as we see the other things that are available to it, it actually kind of makes sense for them to be able to do things like that. So dual casting, again, this does effectively mean that as long as you have spell slots, which being a full caster, you will generally always have spell slots to use. You will just have to decide which spell you will want to use for it. It means that your bonus action is always going to be useful. And as we've said many times before in this series, action economy in for the 5th edition is the most important balancing aspect of combat. Whichever side has more actions, and that includes bonus actions and reactions and movements, more things they can do, they are going to have an advantage. Always. That's just how it works. With the fact that right at for the 1st level, this class can either use cantrips and spells, or can make melee attacks, because they're designed to be able to do both, depending on how you specialize them. They're going to have a bit of a leg up compared to a lot of other classes that don't have a bonus action right at 1st level that they're using a ton. It also means dual wielding with a red mage is not really going to be a beneficial thing, because even just quickening a cantrip is going to be more beneficial than making an offhand attack ever. So to kind of very much fit with the Final Fantasy XIV version of the red mage, you're generally never going to see a dual-wielding red mage, because they would be sacrificing a lot of their versatility with the fact that they wouldn't be able to dual cast while doing that, because your offhand attack would take your bonus action. So yeah, that's dual cast. Going up to second level, you choose your combat style. This is your subclass. Most classes get their subclass at third level. And by most, I mean literally most. More than half get it. There are a ton that get it at second level. Druids get it at second level. I'm trying to think of other ones. There are a couple that get it at just a second level, so it's not a strange thing, and it does kind of make sense because with casters, a lot of times you won't get a new featured ability as a caster on the level that you open up a new level of spells, and at third level you get access to second level spells. So having them choose their subclass at second level just makes sense. Oh, wizards get theirs. It's just a second level, duh. So yeah, full casters in general, second level makes just a sense. By the way, the combat styles themselves are sword dancer, spell slinger, or battle rose. I will have a different video for each one of those, just like normal. So I'll just tell you what the names are now, and you can kind of guess what you think their specialties will be. At fourth level, you get your ability score improvement. It's always how it is. Now, because red mages are a little bit mad, meaning multiple attribute dependent classes, you're going to need charisma for your spellcasting. You're going to need dexterity for your attacks. Again, depending on how you build the class and which subclass you choose. If you are going to be melding that combat and melee a little bit more 50-50, you're going to want to raise both of those to 20. If you're not using your melee attacks nearly as much, you might be able to leave your dexterity at 16 and just increase your charisma and then take a bunch of extra feats to do things. And depending on the feats you choose, you can really turn into some interesting things. If you do go very heavily into the melee aspect and combining spells and swordplay, then taking something like the Piercer feat could be really useful, because that means anytime you get a critical on an attack that does piercing damage, you do an additional damage die of damage. So kind of building your character around a crit style build could be really, really useful. On the other hand, if you're going a little bit more towards focusing more on spellcasting, taking elemental mastery, I think, is the feat. Basically, it allows you to ignore resistance to a certain type of damage. You might go that route and then maybe specialize as, well, I'm going to be a fire red mage, where I use mostly fire spells because people can't be resistant to my fire spells, unlike everyone else where there might be resistance. Stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of interesting ways you can do this depending on how you want to build it. At fifth level, you get extra attack. Again, very, very common. It means... Thank you for the phone. It means that I'm going to see what this is really, really quickly. We will deal with that in just a second. All right, so it means that with extra attack, using your action to cast a spell or a cantrip now is a choice you want to make. If you have like a flame tongue or an ice brand weapon where it does additional damage every time you attack, you may want to dual cast most of your spells and melee attack instead for your action, because you get two attacks. Or if you are casting spells like Elemental Weapon, where it gives you additional damage every time you hit with it, you may want to focus a little bit more on using your extra attack. Again, this gives you choices. It doesn't mean you always want to use your action to cast a spell. Or make an attack. Because again, depending on how you build it, there are going to be options for both ways. Then you don't get another class ability until 18th level. And at 18th level, you get Battle Flourish. which is when you roll initiative, you recover 1d4 Flair points. Now, I've already mentioned the maximum number of Flair points you get is 10. This, every time you roll initiative, you gain at least 1 Flair point. You get up to 4 Flair points, which is almost half your Flair points every time you roll initiative. That makes it really, really easy to just bank Flair points by getting into kind of pointless battles. In general, in the base game, you generally don't see anything that anytime you roll initiative, you gain a resource back. Even things like the Monk 20th level ability gives them 4 key points back if they're at 0 points. And that's the only recommendation I have for Battle Flourish is when you roll initiative, if you have no Flair points remaining, you recover 1d4 Flair points. Simply because, again, you already have the ability in this thing to recover almost half your Flair points. You get them back on a short rest. You don't need that. That does kind of turn your Flair points into something that's never really going to run out. I know it's part of the defining feature and you should be using it relatively often, but you already can. And if the class is not able to use it as much, instead of just giving them extra ones, which will effectively make it an limited resource, I would say increase the number of Flair points that they get, maybe going from 10 to 12 or something like that. I don't think they need a full 20 like a monk. I think 10 is a really good thing. And again, for Battle Flourish, I think it should only be if you have none left, so that they always can use it, but they're not able to stock Pilot. Finally, at 20th level, you get Acceleration. You may cast 2 spells using dual cast rather than 1 spell and 1 cantrip. You must then finish a long rest to use Acceleration again. That is really, really powerful. Now, because of spell slot limitations, you're not able to cast 2 9th level spells because you never have more than 1 9th level spell slot. But you could cast a 9th and an 8th level spell in the same turn, and that is massive. You can do more damage than literally any other class in the game by being able to combine multiple leveled spells. With this being up to the 20th level ability, that makes sense. It's also a one and done ability, which I've mentioned before. I'm generally not a huge fan of one and done abilities unless they are really powerful and really useful. And that's exactly what Acceleration is. It's very powerful. It's extremely useful. And it is the perfect kind of one and done ability. It should be one and done. Yeah. Final thoughts, since again, with this being a full caster build, it's just there's just not a lot of abilities because most of your cool things are going to be either in the subclasses or just getting new spells. So again, final thoughts. It's an interesting class. The one thing that somewhat worries me, just looking at the base class, not thinking about any of the subclasses, is in Final Fantasy XIV and in most of the Final Fantasy games, red mages, the reason they don't need as many spell slots in the first game, and they don't get as many they don't get access to as many levels of spells in later games. I think in Final Fantasy V, I think they only get up to 4th level spells of both white and black. They get access to all white and black spells below 4th level. But they don't get most of the most powerful ones. The reason they're able to deal with that is they can use weapons. They're designed to be a hybrid melee and casting class. And other than extra attack, there is nothing in the base class that really helps you to combine that melee and caster. Which kind of makes sense because there are no other melee caster hybrids in 5th edition, other than you can argue the Paladin. But the Paladin, first of all, is a half caster. So second of all, they are a melee class that can augment their melee with spells, but they're generally not considered a caster at all. This is a full caster and melee ability. So other than extra attack, there's not a ton that really encourages you to mix spells and melee. They definitely will get a lot of use out of the things like Warcaster, which gives them advantage on saving concentration checks they make when they're concentrating on spells. Yeah, but really anything that's going to give them, like Defensive Duelist will be very, very useful for them, because that allows them to use the reaction to add their proficiency bonus to their AC for a single attack, since they are going to be going in to combat, stuff like that. Overall, I like the class. I think it's interesting. This one, the base class, is kind of so bare bones because, again, it's a caster, and most of the cool things you get from the class are going to be based on your spell choice. Because of this, you really can't judge the class at all without looking at the subclasses, which we will be doing, just not in this video. So, yeah. Overall, I like it. I think it's interesting. I will reserve judgment, and I will probably have some modifications for the base class that I will talk about when talking about the subclasses. I've looked at them, but I haven't gone super hardcore into them yet. Just because, again, those subclasses are going to massively modify the base class because of how feature light it is being a full caster. So yeah, like I said, the only thing change for Battle Flourish, change that back to, or change it so that you recover 1d4 Flair points if you have 0 when you roll initiative. And the other thing is change the 6th level spell progression to match every other full caster, because right now red mages have more 6th level spell slots than any other class, and I think it's just a misprint. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on kind of hybrid melee caster classes? Things like the Eldritch Knight, the Blade Singer Wizard, the Hexblade Warlock. Are you a fan of classes that kind of meld them, or do you think it really doesn't work very well in D&D in general? It's much better to specialize in either melee or spellcasting. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all from me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.